So useful techniques for creating badge style logos. So I'm not going to run through all of my Illustrator tips. You can find one of my other classes with my top Illustrator tips for logo design in general, if you're interested in that. But these are tips specific to creating this kind of style of badge style logo, especially the circular ones. So the first tip we'll start with is creating type on a path and balancing that. So our goal is to create something like this where the text is still live, we're still able to adjust the spacing, we can adjust the size, and if you really wanted, you could actually apply this technique to have wording that fully encompassed a circle, and I'll explain how you can use the different controls to fine-tune this and to tweak it to your liking. Now I'm also going to mention another technique that's sometimes used to perhaps not have type go around an entire circle, but certainly to arc type and to bend it. So I'm going to create some placeholder text here and I'll show you the difference as a comparison. So one technique is to use the arc tool in Illustrator. So I'm going to duplicate this. We go to Effect, and under Warp you can select one of these arc options, and you can change these options using this drop down so you can compare the results. So you can see if we go to arc upper, we'll lower the percentage here. This is giving you a flat bottom and just an arching effect, almost a 3D perspective to the top portion of the type here. So for specific purposes, that could be something you wanted to do. I must say it's not something I often use in logo design. If we go back to Effect, Warp and Arc, lower is just the inverse of that, but this regular arc, this is the effect that you may sometimes want to use instead of type on a path, which I'm about to show you. And we'll create quite a noticeable arc on our text here. So let's go all the way to 50%. And then the other technique, this is the one I've used, is to create type on a path. So first we need to create a circle. You can hold Alt to drag out from the center. And you could create an ellipse, but I think if you hold Shift to constrain and you try to use a portion of a perfect circle, that gives you better results. So I'm going to drag this up here and we'll just enlarge this until it's kind of matching the angle we have with our arch at the top here. That looks good to me. I'll just swap so that we've stroked the key line so we can see what we're doing. And then what we need to do, if I move this circle down now, is use the type on a path tool. So under your regular type tool, if you press and hold to see the other options, here you have type on a path tool hidden away. Select that and simply click. It could be any portion of a path. I'm going to click at the top here. And this will use whichever font you had in your palette, and it will flow your type the entire way around that path. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my sample type here that I want to use, copy that, select everything here with Control or Command A, and then paste that type in. With that done, I'll delete that placeholder type. I now need to rotate this into place. So you could simply hit Transform and rotate your circle, but best practice is actually to use the built-in features to position your type. So at the moment you can see my paragraph is actually left aligned, and there are these little, I'll zoom in so you can see them, these little control handles here and here. These signify the beginning and the end of the type area, if you like. So it arcs around and obviously it ends almost back where it begins. So if I zoom out here, I'm going to drag the ending control handle to 3 o'clock and then the starting control handle to 9 o'clock. Because it's left aligned, it's starting from 9 o'clock, but if we now go to paragraph and center align, we've got that lined up nicely, and we're ensuring that that type can flow between those two control handles that we'd set. And a little quick tip I'll share with you is that this control handle that's sitting for me at 6 o'clock at the bottom, it will usually just sit opposite your type. If you click and drag that, you can toggle between the text sitting on the outside or the inside of your key line. And you can also use that to manually rotate and position your type. So I'm going to undo that change. So when I click to deselect, can you spot the difference between these two techniques? If I position them alongside each other, there is quite a big difference, and it's not as noticeable with the font and perhaps the uppercase, but if you look, for example, at the O here, where we've used this arc effect, it's really distorted the O quite noticeably when you look at that perfect O that's sitting where we've used type on a path. Now this is quite a gentle arc that we've used, and we've used uppercase characters which tend to distort a little less than lowercase. But this is actually non-destructive, the arc effect, in the latest version of Illustrator. So if I click on our arced type, you can see there's almost the ghost of the original left behind. And if I click over in Appearance at the effect, you can edit the effect live. Now if this were a more pronounced arc, let's say 75 or even 80%, and I click OK, now some of the type is really not looking great. That O has really been stretched out of proportion. The M I'm not in love with. The U to me looks quite badly distorted. So I wouldn't say it's that one technique is wrong and the other is right, but for certain situations where you're trying to curve text, you don't want any distortion on the characters, and you're looking to do quite a pronounced curve, then I think type on a path is your friend. You'll have less distortion. And I'll hit the undo key, and maybe we'll reduce this even further. Let's take it down to maybe 30%, something like that. So there's a minimal amount of distortion. Some say that the arc tool, because each of the characters have been transformed, so they're kind of perfectly aligned, pointing into the center. Some actually prefer that for a gentle arc like this. So I've shown you both techniques. I'll leave it to you, depending on your artwork, which you feel is best to use. It's also worth noting, although I outlined my type before using the arc effect, in the latest version of Illustrator CC, you can actually keep live type. So even though the arc effect is applied, I could begin adding characters. And although that changes the overall length, which would change the angle, it means to a certain extent this is non-destructive. So that's the case with either technique. So going back to the version I've created, where we have type placed on a path at the top, and then on the bottom here you can see I've had to use that control handle to bring the type inside our path here so that it's situated with the right orientation. You can edit this to your heart's content. You could even change the font later. You can completely adjust the spacing. You can change the size. So it's quite useful to keep it in this format, and actually not to outline the text until you've locked it in and you're 100% happy with it. Another quick tip, when it comes to balancing, I recommend using wider spacing. So you can see I've used 780 tracking for the top portion of type here. And if I were to reduce that to its default, and then instead we had this type larger, you can see it's a completely different effect, and to me it's a little harder to read. So if you bring the size down, that helps your visual hierarchy, especially if this is a tagline. Make sure your eye doesn't go to that first, even though it's positioned at the top of the logo. And then if we really exaggerate the spacing, I think when we hit around the 500 mark for tracking, you know, that's now feeling nice and balanced, both in terms of visual hierarchy and just aesthetically. I think that's a much more pleasing way to read curving type. So I've done the same at the bottom, although that's got a much larger point size. So hopefully those techniques cover all your type, curving and warping needs.